Well, welcome back, everyone. Today I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Joe Rigney. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. We'll jump right in. You recently launched a book, this year,
Yeah.
Leadership and Emotional Sabotage.
Mhm.
Who's leading? Who's emotionally sabotaging? What's this all about?
Yeah, so this was my attempt to basically translate, baptize some insights. This is partly what this is. The work of a guy named Edwin Friedman, the Jewish family systems counselor writing in the 90s, wrote a book called Failure of Nerve, Leadership in the Age of the Quick Fix. I read it about 15 years ago, thought it was really helpful, but had lots of dodgy theology, some evolutionary stuff, psychologically oriented. But I thought a lot of really helpful observations. And so for the last 10 or plus years, I've been kind of translating Friedman whenever I've taught it. And this was kind of the fruit of all of that effort of rooting it in more biblical soil. And so the idea is we live in an anxious society. Anxious here is not just like people are nervous, but angsty, like people are on edge,
Yep.
powder keg, that kind of thing. And it's marked by passions in the driver's seat. So our knee-jerk reactions and impulses kind of lead the way, whether it's desire or fear or pity. These are anger. These are the things that are like leading the way, and where everybody's just kind of getting bounced around by it. In that kind of environment, there's a tendency towards blame shifting, scapegoating. People don't take responsibility for themselves and for what's happening to them and for what they're doing. And then any leader who steps into that and tries to actually take an institution, whether family, church, school, whatever, tries to take it forward is going to be sabotaged, meaning those efforts will be, the attempt will be made to derail those efforts. So sabotage is anytime whatever the mission of your institution is, you're heading that way. Sabotage is any attempt to get you off of that mission. And so a leader who seeks to lead with sober-minded gravity, sober-minded presence is going to be sabotaged, and therefore needs to learn how to resist it, endure it, lead through it. Otherwise, it will get bad.
And who is emotionally sabotaging him?
It's usually the most basically think of it as two groups. The most reactive and immature members of a community are kind of the first ones, but it's actually not about a particular individual. It's more about the way that the institution itself operates, because typically, like you have someone who, if they're going to blow up, they're going to bang on your door, they're going to make demands and demand that you cater and coddle and to their sensitivities. And so you think, they're the problem. It's like, well, actually, it's certain other reasonable people who will then put pressure on you to cater and accommodate. And so it's not just about the person reacting, it's about the others who find that emotional pain so uncomfortable that they're willing to put pressure on you to bend. And so the sabotage is actually coming from two different places. It's both the reactive one, the one who's driven by their passions, and then these other people are actually driven by their passions. They're trying to get away from emotional pain. They find the distress of this person unendurable, and so you're the pressure point where they say, couldn't you just say it a different way? Couldn't you just apologize? Couldn't you just? And whenever they're doing that, they're a part of the sabotage.
And there's different ways to deal with both of those.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, how do you deal with the people who are like maybe on your side, but just don't have the guts to like, okay, we're in this fight now.
Yeah. So they're actually in some ways the hardest ones because they don't look like they're the problem. Everybody, typically the person who is really reactive and driven by their passions and immature, everybody recognizes, that's an issue. And they get a little carried away, and I know they pop off online, and everybody will acknowledge problems. Nobody recognizes the nice guy problem because it looks kind, it looks Christian. And so the hard thing there is to keep the big thing is to keep your eye on the ball. So whenever there's an attempt to sort of do negotiated apologies, well, yes, I know that, Susan yelled at you and called you all kinds of names and then published it online. And she's really sorry about that. But don't you think that the fact that you said that in that meeting, you can see why? I know you didn't intend it that way, but can't you see why? And so shouldn't you apologize too? And at that moment, it's, you keep your eye on the ball. What's the standard? If you sinned, you should absolutely apologize. That's taking responsibility for what you did. If you didn't sin, And if it wasn't even a violation of politeness, it wasn't even that you were sort of socially rude or something, but you just did a normal thing and somebody else blew up, you should absolutely not apologize. And you have to keep drawing people back to the facts and, getting rid of the emotion. The emotional stuff is clouding the vision, and everybody's just and they want you to be one more emotional domino to fall. And so your task is to keep coming back to the brass tacks of but who did the bad thing, and therefore who needs to own the bad thing? Who did the faithful thing, and therefore who needs to stick with their guns.
Right. So leadership is just redirecting and reminding people this is what we were aiming at originally.
Yeah, it's actually more about your own, this is part of the Friedman insight that I think is really biblical, is it's about taking responsibility for yourself. You can't actually control what other people do. You don't have the ability. You can influence them, you can exhort them, you can rebuke them, you can do all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you don't have the power to actually make things happen.
Right.
What you are responsible for is how you are in those settings. So are you steady, stable? Sober-mindedness is the biblical virtue that I commend as sort of the anchor, and I define it as a clarity of mind. So you're not driven by your passions, you're not clouded. A stability of soul, so you're not tossed to and fro by every wind and every emotion, and a readiness to act. So you're not reactive, but you're ready to take an opportunity should it present itself. And that's the thing that a leader has to grow in, is a pain tolerance. You have to be willing to endure people's displeasure. You can't be a people pleaser. You can't fear man. And then you have to be ready to act with sober-minded clarity and courage in the various whatever God and the world throw at you.
Right, and you can't be emotional in your reaction.
Correct.
You did this bad thing. Well, I'm gonna gonna burn you to the ground.
Yeah, and people have different ones. So it's somebody does something to you. Some people blow up. Other people shut down. But both of those are passions. They're just reactive.
Right.
You're just one more emotional domino.
You can't defeat emotions with emotions.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so you self-control and sober-mindedness is don't get drunk on passions. Don't get drunk on your emotions. Emotions are good. It's not that they're bad, and we're not stoics who think all emotions need to be, but they need to be governed. And so it's what's a fitting and appropriate emotion here. So if something bad happens, should you feel sad? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there things that should provoke you into anger? Paul was provoked by the idolatry that he saw. Jesus flipped over some tables. Jesus was moved with compassion. So emotions are all well and good. They're actually really important. The key thing is, are they in charge, or are they being governed by what is true and what is good and what is right? If they're being governed, that's faithful. If they're not, you're in a world of hurt.
You're talking about that angst. Is that something that's more a recent development as of COVID and all of that, or is this more?
No, I think this is a perennial problem since the garden. This is human society's bond over passions. Passions have become this kind of bonding agent, where and it's actually unusual when you have healthy societies that are able to find a better balance. I do think, and Friedman's writing in the 90s, he's seeing it as a part of our societal sickness, that we're constantly leveraging power to the most immature, reactive, hostage situations.
The loudest.
Whoever, squeaky wheel gets the grease. The loudest, the people who bang the loudest, everybody caters to them. That tendency he saw in the 90s as sort of, this is where the West is, this is where America is. And that was before social media. And social media just amplified that. And so, I think I think part of why the book has felt timely, it's done surprisingly well. I thought it's a good book, but it's sold really well. And I think part of it is because coming out of COVID, coming out of the woke stuff, everybody recognizes this is what just happened to us. And they're trying to figure out, how do we get ready for the next one? How do I make sense of what just happened? And how do I prepare for what's coming?
So how do you deal with anxiety, stress? Obviously, those things do happen in real life, in our day-to-day lives. And to an extent, they're kind of a good thing, right? Because it shows that you actually have things going on in your life.
Yeah, skin in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Paul's anxious about the churches because he cares, and you should care. The two things, I think some of the more actionable, practical things in the book are, one, you have to have self-awareness. So you have to be able, you have to be dialed into your own passions. When are you avoiding emotional pain. So you're kind of walking on eggshells. People start to, you see a situation and you're going to go, I'm not going to say that, and I'm not going to say that. And we are surprisingly adept at that. Maybe not surprisingly. We're just very good at it. We're very good at knowing this is the thing that if I say will be a problem. And sometimes we do it because we want to provoke them and they're going to come back and you just, just like your kids.
Fun to be in a fight.
It's fun to be in a fight. And so, and we just pop off. Other times we're always trying to avoid it and we walk on eggshells. Learning to recognize when you're doing that. When you have hesitations, reluctances, when you're getting angry, when you're being manipulated, being dialed into yourself is step one. Because then you have to interrogate, okay, I'm doing this thing. I'm avoiding certain topics. I'm not going to say certain things. Why? Is this wisdom?
Right.
Or is it cowardice?
Yeah.
And it could be either. But I think a lot of times it's cowardice and we call it wisdom.
Right.
I'm not going to, I don't want to rock you. There'll be a better time. And it's like, well, will there ever be a better time? And instead, so that's step one, is be aware. The second thing is in dealing with these, a lot of times these kind of conflicts and these kind of sabotage is under the table. It's subtle. It's impressions. It's not out in the open. It's not clear what the issue is. And wise leaders are always trying to bring under the table conflict onto the table. We need to all be able to see what we're doing. So they're pushing towards clarity. What is the actual difference? What is the disagreement? So I use in the book, I use the example of Paul in Galatians. It's at Antioch when he's telling the story about how Peter, out of fear of the world, is pressured by James to withdraw from the Gentiles, and he does, and in doing so, he's the leader, and so Barnabas and the rest of the Jews follow him in that hypocrisy. And so there you can see kind of the concentric circles of influences. The angst kind of comes into the system, and Peter fails. His nerve fails. Paul sees this, and you can imagine the rationalizations that Peter would make. Well, I'm only doing this temporarily until things calm down. Until there's just a lot of persecution going on. I'm just trying to be wise. I don't want to cause problems. I'm being compassionate.
Right.
You can imagine the explanations, and Paul is going, okay, all of this is hypocrisy and fear. I need to get it on the table. And so it says he opposed him to his face, and he said, Peter, here's the issue. You got saved this way. They got saved the same way. Why are you acting like you're better than them? Why are you acting like they're not full members of God's house? So he's taking sublimated conflict and putting it on the table, where now you have to actually address the principle. What's good and right and faithful? Are we going to do that no matter the cost? And so I think good leaders do this. I think that they're regularly trying to take submerged conflict and put it on the table. And get clarity about what it is, and they may have desires about how they hope it goes. I hope we get clarity, and then everybody does the right thing. But they're budgeting for get clarity. Like Paul sometimes got clarity and then got beat up. Here's clarity and then mob.
Right.
And that's always on the table, and you can't get thrown by that either.
But it doesn't mean that's not the right thing to do.
Correct. Exactly.
You bring it to the table.
That's success.
And that's what happens.
So
exactly.
Paul thought a riot was a perfectly acceptable outcome because he's not in control of the other people's passions. He's in control of his own.
Right, exactly. Speaking on that topic, Simon Sinek has a principle which I'm paraphrasing, which is you always tell the truth, but you don't always tell it at the in the moment. So he gave an example of a friend of his who was at this in this play that he went and saw because she was a friend of his, and she came up to him afterward, and he was like, "It was a terrible play, perhaps the worst I've ever seen." Uh-huh. And she asked him, "What'd you think?" And he was like, and he said to her, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad I got to come and see you." And then the next day, when all the emotions had died down and like the angst and the thrill and the adrenaline had calmed, he was like, "Look, I'm going to be honest, that wasn't a great play."
Yeah.
But in the moment, I'm proud to see you
honesty
there.
Would be rude.
Right.
At that moment. Yeah. No, that's a totally legitimate principle. And it is about, it's a wisdom call. Is this the right time and place for this? The issue more often though is people who frame their situation that way. I'm just biding my time. I'm waiting for the right moment. And it never comes. The right moment never comes because it's not really about the right moment. It's about fear of man. I don't want to upset people. And and I know that there's never going to be a right time where this won't be upsetting, or at least I think it won't be upsetting. Sometime, and then try it. Let's find out. Pray about it. Ask God, and then take the shot.
Right. When is the right moment when it's time to offend?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of leadership, unfortunately, we're close to having a female president as our leader.
Mm-hmm.
What should that tell us about the current situation?
Yeah, I think, the possibility of a female president is just sort of like the end result of feminism's long, metastasizing as a cancer in society. So Kamala or Hillary or any of them being president would have been just the icing on the cake. Right now, you've got even the champions of the good side are massively compromised on this issue. So I saw the other day that a Congresswoman, Nancy Mace from South Carolina, is the one who's leading the charge against men and women's bathrooms. Right. And she's like, we got to protect female spaces. Well, but Nancy Mace became famous because she was the first graduate from the Citadel. She was a woman who invaded male spaces because she broke the glass ceiling.
Yep.
In order to get into the military, and so they tore down that wall of there are male spaces and female spaces. They tore it down, and then now it's coming back to bite them. And they want to say, well, no, we didn't.
In a much uglier form.
In a much uglier form, and it's sort of that's actually interesting. It's like when David sins with Bathsheba, and Samuel says, "Your son, what you did in secret, your sons are going to do in the light of day." So what you did is sort of like a small thing, because you didn't repent of it, because you allowed it, is going to grow and fester and get uglier. And that feminism, like the trans stuff, is the fruit of feminism. And so the fact that as a society, we are prepared to let women be our political champions, that we want women in combat, is a sign of our deep sickness and hostility to reality. We don't know what women are for. We don't even know what women is, and therefore is a big issue. Now, the flip side, the opportunity at the present moment that I think is kind of interesting is you do have folks who, because of their recoil against stuff like the trans and the maiming of children, are like, whoa. And that recoil is an opportunity to rethink some stuff.
Right.
And the question is, how much are you going to rethink? Do you just want to go back to an earlier stage of rebellion? Like, I would like to be 5 months pregnant with rebellion, not giving birth to the baby. Is that all you're wanting? Or is it like, no, we want to repent of it all. We want to go all the way back. So that there's that possibility. And you have folks who are arguing, so Pete Hegseth's maybe going to be the Secretary of Defense, and he says women shouldn't be in combat. And that's the sort of opinion that, 3 years ago, nobody
was reasonable.
Nobody. Well, it was reasonable 20 years ago. People would have thought, yeah, that makes sense. 50 years ago, it would have been unthinkable to throw women into combat. And now we've gone so far, but now, hey, maybe there's some sanity returning. And so there's opportunities there if we're ready to sort of show that there's a logic to these things, that we always are going to try to live consistently. We don't succeed. People are inconsistent, but we at least attempt it. And so if you can establish some basic things, men and women are different. Men and women are for different things. Then maybe people begin to rethink it. The other thing that's on that front kind of encouraging is that while Trump and his administration are largely feminists in that sense, right?
Yeah.
It's like, look at all the ladies that we're putting up there, and girl bossing it. His daughter-in-law, maybe she's going to get appointed to a Senate seat because girl boss. There's sort of, they're ideologically committed to feminism, but all of the aesthetics and vibes of Trump are very masculine.
Right.
And so there's the real jar between fight, fight, fight. And you kind of see masculinity just in its sort of visceral form, right? I just got shot at, but I'm not bowed. I'm bloody, but and you're like, well, that's there's masculinity right there. And then Trump in general kind of embodies a form of, he knows he's a dude, and part of the reason that Harris lost is that the dudes that she got to support her were not dudes.
We're not entirely sure.
We're not into. Their man cards were.
Expired.
Yeah. But Trump puts off dude vibes. And so you've got this jarring between ideology. So we're committed to this: men and women are interchangeable, and women are just as good at all the things as men are. Men are, all that. We just don't want to go all the way to trans. So there's this ideological commitment, and yet they know it can go too far, and all of their sentiments are still oriented in some measure to reality, even if it's a twisted form of it. So that actually bodes well. It's like, hey, well, maybe we should have men and women all the way down.
Right. How do Christians ride the wave that is, oh, hey, something might be wrong here, all the way into the beach and try and get back to we're not pregnant with rebellion?
Yeah. So start with where you are. So your home needs to be that way. Your churches and community. So basically, some of the recoil creates space for institutions that operate with a more biblical, patriarchal operating system, where men take responsibility and lead, and they do it for the good of those under their care, and women assist and help and make things beautiful and glorious, and it works really well. So there's space for that sort of arrangement in a way that I think Democrats are at war with that overtly and want to tear it all down. And so now there's some space for it. We should do that. And then you should be ready with both modeling it. This is what it looks like, and arguments. We should, when people say we want to allow, we love feminism, tear down break that glass ceiling, and gay marriage is all cool, but we don't want to mutilate kids for trans. It's like, well, there's a package there.
Right.
And you have to, and people might be able to follow an argument.
This is a road you have chosen.
Yes.
And that's where it ends.
It goes there. And so if you don't want to end there, let's back. Where did we actually go wrong? Switch roads. Go back and get on a different road. And certain folks, a friend of mine calls them reality respecters. It's like the 21st century equivalent of the God-fearer. In the New Testament, there's this category of the God-fearers. They're pagan Gentiles, but they sort of like Israel's God, and they kind of want to be synagogue adjacent. They're not circumcision. They're like, I'm not doing that. But
they don't want to anger God.
Yeah, but they're oriented and they're curious. Reality respecters, I think, would be that kind of thing. And so it's how much reality will you respect? So you're saying, hey, we got to respect reality when it comes to maiming children in the name of gender ideology. Reality is that boys are boys from the beginning, girls are girls. We don't do that. Oh, okay. Well, does that apply to marriage? Does that apply? How far? Boys are boys. How much? Really? How much reality we're going to respect? And I think we should try to push that Overton window heavily, even though it's going to make some people uncomfortable.
Right. Well, it's on wheels. See what we can do.
Exactly.
And the shift on the other side has been, let's drive into the opposite ditch, where we find ourselves with men like Andrew Tate.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
No feminism. Women have basically no rights.
Right.
How do you bring them back to the middle of the road?
Yeah, so at some level, I'm not sure. So Tate himself or guys who are committed there, I'm not interested. I'm interested in quarantining it, not convincing it. But there are people who I think, in reaction to the Longhouse and the feminism in our society, have said, well, I don't want that. I don't want the Longhouse, and this is masculine, so I'm going to go for it. And it's a corrupt. It's boyhood, not manhood.
Right. It's 13-year-olds
with grown bodies.
Right.
And that have recognized that men do. There's certain kind of manly virtues that men respect, things like courage and strength and skill, which ungodly, and then that results in honor. People respect it as status, and so you've got all of that, and it's just it's sitting on a foundation of immaturity and passions and enslavement, and so I think that so I can understand the appeal, because it's a knockoff. It's a parasitic knockoff of true masculinity, but it's recognizably male, unlike Men for Harris, which wasn't. And so I get the appeal and want to say that neither of these are actually the thing that you were made for. What you were made for is skill, courage, strength, and honor in service of the living God and his people. So you were made to be a father. You were made to be a husband. You were made to give yourself for others, to lay down that desire that men have to lay themselves down for the good of someone else. That's a real thing, and is why the war movies move us. when the guys do the charge and the whole deal is they're laying down their lives for the sake of others, and it's like you were made for that, not for playtime.
Pretending you're a woman.
Yeah. Well, playtime pretending you're a woman, or playtime pretending you're a man in the Andrew Tate sense.
Yeah.
Right.
And but you're interested more in quarantining it than.
Yeah.
Actually,
so I'm just I don't. In the same way that I don't have could God save somebody out of it? Sure. And so we want to preach to it, but I think the target is more folks who are curious about that, but still have some tethering. That's where I think the fields are white for the harvest. So it would be young men who kind of look at that and go, well, he's got a lot of money and ladies seem to like him. And it's like, good, you should want to win a woman, right, and you should want to be successful and fruitful in your life. And that looks like it, but it's fake.
Right.
It doesn't have any it looks like gravity, but it's not gravity. It's empty. And he doesn't say he's empty. He seems like he's having a great time. And he's like, we'll see. It's the same sort of thing. Like Tate, I look at someone like Tate, and I don't like listen to a lot of his stuff or anything like that. But when I've seen clips and things like that, it's the same vibe that when you see like a 42-year-old single woman who's like, I'm living my best life. I get to go to the club.
That woman who went famous. Yeah.
Yeah. Who's like, that's her whole shtick. Like, I don't have kids. I can go to the club on Thanksgiving. And you're looking at it and you're like, okay, like I don't. We'll just see how that goes for you.
Look at the road you're on.
Yes. You're like, I know how this ends. And I think the same thing's true of someone like Tate. There is a season of time in which you have all of your strength or your beauty and all of your wits and your power and everything else, and you can do something with it. And what you're doing with it is wasting it. You're just absolutely, it's not what it's for. And so at some point you're sowing right now. You're in a season of sowing. When it's time to reap, I don't think you're going to like what you reap. And so that's the warning. And the Bible gives it, the Proverbs warns us about certain kinds of friends. Don't be friends with them because they're lying in wait and they're plotting and they're wicked. Don't be friends with them. And then it warns young men about certain kinds of women. She's the bad lady. She's an adulterous woman. She's got all the beauty and the charm, and she's trying to draw you in, but it's all ugly. It takes you to hell. So, but instead, what's this a parody of? It's a parody of what manhood actually is and what womanhood actually is.
Yeah, and one of the things that group has struggled with is anti-Semitism, and that's kind of been on.
Talking about the guys who like Tate.
Yes.
Okay.
That's been on a bit of a riotous rise, and even people. I saw someone who actually I met once came over to Moscow, and he posted a image of himself with a Hitler mustache,
right, touting
the things Hitler was doing.
Yeah.
How have we gotten to the point where people are looking at Hitler as in the wrong time?
Yeah. So I think that some of it is it's reactionary transgressiveness. It's a bunch of young folks largely, although there's guys in the middle ages who are middle-aged who are doing the same thing. And they know they've been lied to about lots of stuff, from COVID to feminism to everything else. And so it's like, how many things have we been lied to about? And so they want to rethink everything. And at one level, I want to say, so this is where I've got some sympathy. I'm like, if you guys are, hey, have we been, lied to about World War II and we need to rethink all these kind of things? Insofar as we're just doing that, I go, great. We should be able to ask questions and rethink stuff. But it does seem like something else goes on when it becomes, but we're going to rehab the Nazis. And it's like, well, okay, hold on a minute. We're going to celebrate them. We're going to, Hitler's a Christian prince. Or when it becomes, when it's paired, sometimes like I'm just asking questions, or I'm just noticing things, or I'm just rethinking the post-war consensus. And I'm going, well, but if that was true, why is behind every Western sin or every European sin or every American sin, white sin, is a Jew? Like all of a sudden I go, like, I'm enough of a kind of Girardian when it comes to scapegoating that when everybody's constantly, well, that's fun. We got to move. Ooh. That's amazing. The lights went off. Here.
Exciting times. Oh. Didn't even make it to the switch.
That's right. It's actually motion censored, but we're behind it. So, okay. Okay. What were we talking about? Oh,
anti-Semitism.
Yeah. So it's when all of the problems end up being in one place, I go, okay, something else seems to be going on, And we ought to be mindful that this is a universally human characteristic to try to find scapegoats for our problems. And historically, Jews have been a really convenient one because there tend to be smaller enclaves of Jews. They tend to be successful, and therefore they're a target. And now the guys that on the other side say, yeah, and they deserved it. And I think this is where the disagreement comes. Like, well, is it that everywhere Jews go, they're always the bad guy because they are the bad guy, and that's why we need to do something about it? Or is it that human beings are prone to always find scapegoats? And maybe it's a little of both, and you got to examine different examples. That's fine. But when I hear it today, and it's about when the Nazis are being praised, and we're gonna people say it's just fun and games. People say it's just funny. We're just having fun. I go, well, one of the things I learned from C.S. Lewis was you turn into the thing that you're pretending to be. And so if you're LARPing and you're pretending, we love Nazis, it's like the same thing earlier. I know where that road goes.
Eventually you become one.
Yeah, eventually you're going to turn into it. And so I want to wave the warning while also saying if it's just we're rethinking stuff, I got all kinds of patience for different views of history and things like that. But when it's something else is driving it, and you can usually find out because if you just say, well, we shouldn't be malicious and hate Jews. And then, what are you saying? And then all of a sudden it comes back real far. You're like, okay, I think I'm over something.
Right. Yeah. How do you deal with them in a different way than you deal with the people who are just like, I want to know what actually happened in history?
Yeah. So I think it takes some, like, there's a think of it as a general thing that you might do publicly. I don't want to attract that stuff to my church. I don't to my community. I think it's ugly and nasty in the same way that I don't want feminism to take root. So I might preach sermons that would, if there was any feminist-y kind of stuff hanging out, yeah, it would leave. I would do the same thing. And so I think that's why, Pastor Wilson, when Doug did stuff about Antioch Declaration, was basically that. Like, yeah. Hey, that's not going to be welcome here. On the ground, if someone actually is having questions, it's going to be more of a listening conversation, debating, discussing, to see, is this simply normal historical debate, or is it something more? And I think the interesting thing about the community here is I think Doug. This isn't the first rodeo on this kind of stuff. So when Doug rethought the Civil War consensus and began writing about slavery and kind of how does the Bible think about that, it was really, he's questioning history, and he knew that doing so. So he wrote a book called Black and Tan where he did that and challenged the historical consensus. And in doing so, he knew he was going to attract certain kind of people who were going to try to jump on that little bandwagon and all of a sudden start wearing their white hoods,
right?
And talking about how race mixing is bad and all this sort of stuff. And so he wrote a second book called Skin and Blood, in which he blasted that kind of actual racial pride, racial superiority, racial malice that was there. And so he did one thing that could potentially attract some gnarly stuff, and then he made sure to clear it out. And I think that in some ways that's what I'm hoping for in the present case. If it is just we're rethinking World War II because we now have enough distance to be able to see some things more clearly, I go, okay, I can budget for that. If we're rethinking, was Churchill a good guy, and was Stalin really pulling all the strings, and all those kind of questions, and what resulted from it in terms of the international order, great, fine, we can talk about that. But we also better be prepared that some people are going to go, hey, there's something really, but the Jews, and think that that's the big issue that we have to deal with, and you better be prepared to swat that away before it takes root in your system. So that's kind of what I'm hoping happens, is that there kind of sanity prevails, and that the guys who are sincerely just wanting to understand history better. The other element of it that I think about is I have questions about those who think this is the fundamental issue, most pressing issue that we have to figure out right this minute. Meaning the issue being like what to do about the Jews or something. That's like, even if I said, okay, I'm, for the sake of argument, I'll grant there's something here. Why is it the most pressing issue ever? And that's where my scapegoat detector starts to kind of it's
Go
like
off.
I go off because I kind of go, I think that there's probably more. It starts to feel to me like a kind of intellectual pornography, where effort that's meant to take you in a certain direction, that's to be fruitful, you need to be providing, you need to be doing all sorts of things. The effort that should be going there is being sort of spent over here. Like we're wasting time. It's
laziness.
Like it's just we're going to turn this over, and it feels to me, it looks like it's behaving sometimes like a lust, where there's the same kind of obsession and addiction that someone could have to pornography, where they're just turning a woman's body over and over in their imagination. Now it's just they're behind it all. They're behind it all. Did you notice that? Did you notice that? And it feels like the pastoral sense kind of goes off there, and people go, that's not good enough. I go, sorry, that's all I got. If you're allowed to notice things, so am I.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of shifting topics a little bit. There's been a bit of an odd focus on men's mental health over the past couple years, which is strange, and I'm not entirely sure what to think about it, and also why now.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the mental health stuff, especially for men, has to do with like modernity, like modern conditions, meaning technological, digital, globalized, is hostile to humanity. Like it's not a world like technology can be a blessing, but it often brings with it these certain kind of social conditions. And I think the big part of it is I am subject to forces that I can't do anything about. I actually think this is somewhat related to the other question too. And therefore I have no agency. And so I don't know what to do.
Right.
And so
I'm powerless.
I'm powerless, right? And that loss of agency, I can't, like if I want to, do something to provide for my family, if I want to be able to live in a community that doesn't have all kinds of toxic nonsense from the world flooding into it, there's no way for me to build that and hand it on. I think that a lot of people feel that way.
Right.
And that disorientation of I can't do anything, I think then leads to the various kinds of pathologies of men's mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, the suicide stuff, the kind of hope. It's a hopelessness of I don't know what I'm for. Sometimes it's guys who either don't get married or married and then you have divorce and you have all kinds of stuff, and it's like what's even the point? And so I think we need to know what we're for. And men in particular want to know that what they're doing matters, that they are building something, providing something, that something is, that they matter for that.
Right.
And I think in the absence of communities where they can actually see like, oh no, that's it. I think that then it comes out sideways.
Right. There's a famous saying, give men a why and they'll do anything in the world.
That's right.
And if you don't have a why, which a lot of these people don't. But interestingly, a lot of this push is coming from oftentimes the secular left, people who are not Christian, who don't focus on like, hey, community is actually a really good thing. Why are they pushing it?
I think sometimes, I think there's a couple of different groups. Sometimes there's a group that's trying to treat men like women. So there is a kind of like men need to be as inward oriented, emotionally attuned as women are. So I think there's some of that. I think that there's another group though that recognizes in our push to help girls get ahead that we left the guys behind, that everything became about can girls succeed, girls, and masculinity was pathologized, and normal boy stuff was treated as though it was toxic.
Right.
And recognize that the result of this has been disastrous, because it either means guys shut down and they retreat until they blow up.
Yep.
And eventually, and they retreat because you can beat them down long enough, but eventually they start to find each other, and there's nothing more dangerous to society at a sort of earthly level. There's nothing more dangerous to society than groups of disaffected young men who have nothing to do and nothing, they don't know what nothing to live for, and so they're just going to burn it down.
Right.
And so I think there's the West has this problem, China has this problem, Europe has this problem, like this idea of like, what are they for? The part of the civilization harnesses male aggression for productive purposes. That's what it does. Yeah. It says men love to do dangerous stuff and big things. And it says, well, we want to harness that And what's the harnessing mechanism that God provided? And it's like, it's marriage and children, right? Why am I going to build the things? It's for them. I'm going to leave a legacy to my kids. I'm going to build something that I can pass on. And so now all of that aggression and energy is channeled in a fruitful direction. If you ditch that, which our society has decided
It's working on it.
Yeah, we don't want that. We're going to ditch it. Now you still got all the energy. You still got all the pent-up aggression. You still got all of that, and it needs to go somewhere. But now it's not. There's nothing to build for, and so either it despairs or it's destructive.
It ruptures.
Yes, and so then, and that you were back to the Tate discussion, where it's just going to spend itself in sexual pleasure or making money or other kinds of exploitation, or it's going to be actual, like, burn it all down.
Right. What is your take on, like, how to actually achieve? Because people are actually, there are guys who are in that state of, I'm going to either rupture or I'm going to shut down forever.
Mm-hmm.
What is the right way to achieve mental health, as the world calls it? I don't love that term.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think so. You can't get anywhere if you've not been forgiven. So you have to actually, like, the gospel actually does start here with all of your sins have been forgiven. God is happy with you. You actually have a happy father. You may have not had your earthly father may have abandoned you. You don't even know who he is. But the God who made you is pleased for you in Christ. So trust in him and live underneath the smile of a happy father. And then what's he want you to do? And what he wants you to do is find a woman, love her for the rest of your life, have children with her, and build something great. That's what you're here for. Like, commend the greatness of God by being a man that imitates him. And so that would be the call. And the challenge, I think, is for a lot of guys is that agency thing where it's hard to do it, but you can't do it by yourself. You really do need, like, there was a time, I think, in at least American history, where a guy who was like, I want to do that, could sort of say, and I'm taking my family and we're going west and we're going to, plop down a little house on the prairie,
right,
and build something. Now, even that was often a communal effort. It wasn't just solo people. Like, you had
a lot of those solo people died.
Yeah, like the ones that went off by themselves actually did die, because we're not meant to do that. But building community from scratch was possible. Well, we don't really have the build community from scratch. There's not a big frontier to the west that you can just go, well, there's still a lot of land, but the need for a community in which you can exercise that and be a part of building something is something I think a lot of people crave and is actually difficult to come by, because there's not enough communities like that need walls to keep out junk. And a lot of communities have no walls.
And I think there is actually a frontier for people to go create their own communities, but it's online.
Yeah, right.
And that's why social media partly has taken off, is you can create your own, like, you can go plant your little house on the prairie on the internet.
On the internet, yeah.
And
your
gain lots of friends.
Yes. But it's all, it's curated in a way that real life community isn't. So real life community embodied has the limitations, whereas you can sort of reinvent yourself online in ways that are, in the long term, you kind of, again, become the thing you're pretending to be, or there's such a big gap that, the guy who's thundering online is actually this really meek, wallflowery kind of guy, couldn't talk his way out of a paper bag, just
right.
And it's like the gap there becomes an incredible burden. And so I think there's a guy named Joshua Mitchell who's talked about the difference between supplements and substitutes. And so there are certain things that are good if they're supplements. So, like vitamins, take your vitamins. Yeah. But if you tried to turn a vitamin into a substitute for meals, something's gone off. Same way with digital communication, social media. Facebook friends is a great supplement. It enables, if it's serving the real thing, then it's valuable. If it replaces or attempts to substitute for the real thing, it becomes destructive.
I talked to Chris Schlecht about this last week, because
yeah,
he had a similar question of, like, why are you doing this? And because his main qualm was, like, often social media is, you can create your own community that is a mirage.
Correct.
And it lacks the depth of real people. So we talked about that.
Yes.
But yes, there's a lot there. You wrote a book, Designed by Joy, which
it's on manhood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Somewhat ties into this.
Okay.
can you talk maybe a little about the difference between joy and happiness, and why is that important?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think at one level in the Bible, both words get used interchangeably. So happiness and joy biblically are just the same thing. I think when people, Christians particularly, try to distinguish them, usually what they mean is something like happiness depends on what happens to you. It's circumstantial. It's about your it's things that happen to you that are responsible for whatever good feelings you have. Whereas joy is something that's more enduring and that you could experience and could endure even in the midst of great sorrow and tragedy. So when what happens to you is terrible, joy could still be there deep down. And I think that's a reasonable thing. So Paul can say things like sorrowful yet always rejoicing, and that makes sense.
Right.
He's like, I'm crushed, I'm pressed, I'm perplexed, I don't get it, and yet joy is running underneath it all, sustaining me. And I think that's what the gospel, what the scriptures offer to us is we live in a broken world. It's a world of sin. It's a world of death. It's a world of suffering and hardship. This is sort of what like Jordan Peterson has made his entire career about just that observation. Suffering is real.
Yeah.
Life is hard. It sucks sometimes. It sucks often. And so, and then the issue is that's true. We live in Ecclesiastes world. But God is real. And there's what if there's joy beyond the sun? What if the deepest truth isn't the suffering and the hardship and the pain, but what if the word after that is resurrection, is life, is joy, is gladness? What if the light and momentary affliction that we experience here is nothing compared to the eternal weight of glory that God's offering to us there? So that's the Christian answer, is to say there's resurrection on the far side of death. Faithful death always leads to resurrection in the world God made. Christ has risen from the dead in the middle of history, and therefore has testified and established this is the true story of the world. And then that then gives us hope, which is what sustains us through all of those trials and suffering, so that the suffering of the present time isn't worth comparing to that glory. And that's where the joy is.
The light has overwhelmed the darkness.
Right.
And
Christmas.
Right, exactly. Is joy an emotion? Because happiness sounds like it is.
Yeah.
Joy sounds like a little more than that.
So depending on how people are going to use their terms a little differently here, but joy is it's a good feeling deep in the soul. If that's something. So there's an emotional and unavoidable affectional element. If you didn't have any good feeling in the soul, I don't think you would talk about it as joy. What we're trying to do when we say something like happiness is an emotion and joy isn't, is to say happiness feels like it's circumstance dependent, and so forth. It rides on circumstances, whereas joy is the sort of thing that plows through them.
Got it.
Right. And so and I think this is why, because it's Christian joy, at least, is oriented to Christ. It's oriented to God. And so therefore, because he doesn't change, the circumstances don't interrupt it. It can plow through because living is Christ and dying is gain. He's good. He's better.
There's no lost outcome.
Correct. Yeah. So nothing good will finally be lost. It's all, and therefore that anchors you. So joy acts as an anchor. It's the Bible says, joy of the Lord is our strength. It's the thing that sustains us in the hardship, in the trial, because it's at some level, if you want to go super theological here, it's God's own joy. It's God's own happiness in himself that he has given to us in our hearts through the Holy Spirit. So it's when Jesus says, I say these things to you so that you might have my joy fulfilled in you. He's saying it's Christ's own joy that he offers to us, and that joy is now untouchable by any hardship or pain or suffering or death. He's conquered it all, and therefore that's what he gives us in giving us the Holy Spirit.
You wrote a book several years ago called Live Like a Narnian.
Yeah.
How do the Narnians exemplify that living through joy?
Yeah, well, so book one is always winter, never Christmas. This is sort of this is hard. It's like February. February in northern climates is the worst. You're like, why are we even here? And so but what is Christmas? In that always winter, never Christmas is always hardship with no joy in the midst of it. And the first Narnian story is about the invasion of Christmas. It's Father Christmas gets back in. There's a thaw coming. Aslan's on the move. And so we've not been abandoned to the deathly cold of the witch's reign, but God's Aslan is going to reconquer. He's going to bring the joy, which he does. So Father Christmas gets in and gives the presents. The thaw comes. Aslan conquers, and then you see that kind of like work its way out through the other stories in things like Prince Caspian. There's another long period of time where all of the good things have been driven into hiding, but they're sort of kept alive. There's a community that sort of keeps alive the memory of what a godly and faithful kingdom looks like, or in even in that last battle, right? Which is the story where everything just goes wrong. Well, the last third of the book is, because there's true Narnia on the horizon. So in those one of my favorite ones is there's a little picture in Horse and His Boy of when Shasta first sees the Narnians, and he says that they look very different from the civilization he's a part of. The Colorings are very dour and kind of greedy and harsh and oppressive.
Bent.
Slave society, bent, and then he sees the Narnians and they just stick out like a sore thumb. Like, whoa, what is this? And it says their arms are swinging free, and he said they look like they were ready to be friends with anyone who was friendly and didn't give a fig for anyone who wasn't. And that sort of idea of like they were just free and humble and faithful. He said it says Shasta had never seen anything more beautiful in all his life. So that's Narnian sort of joy. It's humility before God. It's freedom. It's liberty because you're loved by God. And if you build a civilization on that, it's really, really attractive.
What made C.S. Lewis such a great author, and by extension Narnia such a great series?
I think he was a Christian all the way down. So just he thoroughly the most thoroughly converted man. One of his friends said, he says, no one's ever been converted like him. Just got into everything. And then I think the other thing, a big part of it is his he just soaked in great books, man. How many classics did he have to read and reread before he had the mental furniture and architecture to construct Narnia? He all of that had to be like in his blood before he was able to kind of bring out this great treasure, both in whether it's in Narnia or Space Trilogy or his nonfiction writings. All of these are the product of someone who has just steeped himself in classic literature, and so it came from his Christian faith, and then that.
You gave a sermon a couple weeks ago about free will. You made an analogy in there involving the sun, which I didn't really understand then and still don't now.
Okay.
Would you mind explaining the analogy and what you meant by it?
The idea is that God causes good things in ways that so God causes everything. So behind everything is God. Disaster doesn't befall a city unless the Lord has done it. He forms light. He creates darkness. He ordains both good and evil. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. God is behind everything. But the Bible also teaches that God's not behind everything in the same way. Meaning, when good things happen, that's God giving of himself. He's good. And so when good things come, he's communicating something of himself. What about when evil things come? Well, he's not evil. God is light, in him there's no darkness at all. So how does light cause darkness? And the answer is by withdrawing. So the idea is that so you can still say does the sun cause nighttime? And we say that's a weird way to think. It's like, but it does. The sun causes night by its absence. The sun causes darkness by its absence. In the same way that the sun causes cold by its absence. So when the sun's present, you get heat because the sun is communicating its own nature. So light and heat are of the nature of the sun, and so God is like that. God's the sun. He communicates himself in good things, and then he ordains, controls, orchestrates bad things by withdrawing, by withholding himself, so that you get darkness and cold. That's the basic kind of analogy.
How does that tie in with the doctrine of God is ever present? And he is everywhere at once, right? He is behind all things, actively, correct?
Yeah. So God sustains. So God sustains everything in being, but should he withdraw sort of his gracious presence or something like that, then human wills devolve, like they turn aside, they turn away from that for which they were made. So they were made for God, and if He withdraws, they turn inward. And that turning inward though is on them. This is the kind of the mystery of divine sovereignty and human freedom, is God ordains every bit of it, and yet humans are responsible for all of it.
Right.
So it was wicked when they killed Jesus, and God planned and ordained it.
Yeah.
That was the greatest sin ever, and God was behind it. How the mechanism is something like God withholds some aspect of His sustaining presence and grace. So He's present in holding us in being, but also allows, permits, ordains that our will would turn aside by withdrawing Himself.
Allows, and that's what you mean by withdraw, is allows or permits
us to turn aside.
But also like He is, behind it, in a weird way.
Right.
Like we're sinning, but
He's ordaining.
He's ordaining and also like upholding us.
Correct.
We can't sin without Him.
And this is where like I find the analogy of like an author and his story to be a really useful one for this, where it's like, why does Sauron exist? Why does the White Witch exist? Because Tolkien and Lewis put them in their stories.
Right.
And so at the same time, does Tolkien approve of the witch, or Tolkien approve of Sauron? Does Lewis approve of the witch? Is he like, is this the goodness in the story? No, but it's serving the goodness in the story. Why does the White Witch exist? So that Aslan has someone to conquer.
Right. And so C.S. Lewis may be glorified.
Correct.
And we're in the story for God to be glorified.
Correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so is that how the free will points to the existence of God?
Will you say more about that?
Yeah. What obviously all things, when looked at correctly, point to God.
Mm-hmm.
How does free will
show
us that?
So free will,
if
all we mean by free will is you do what you want, which I think is what most people mean. Like I can do what I want. Then yes, and so your desires, you were made for God, and so by nature your will should be fixed on God. What sin is when that will that ought to be oriented to God, delighting in Him, loving Him, turns around in on itself and puts the self at the center. And so now you're trying to satisfy a desire that was made for God with something not God. This is why sin doesn't work.
Right.
And so that turning is where the sin is. But if it's you doing it, if you're doing what you want, then that's free, right? There's no gun to your head. Nobody's constraining you. You're simply using the will that God gave you for something that it wasn't made for.
Got it. So the free will points to God because you have free will, more or less, in that like the only reason we have free will is because we live in a world where God expressly ordained that there should be people who can do good and bad things. He
wants good characters that have he wants characters that have real creaturely agency. So he wants characters. And that means that within the level, this is why the author story, within the level of the story, you can explain everything by the character's actions. Why did that happen? Because he did it. Why did that happen? Because she did it. All of that is at the level of creaturely freedom. Okay?
Yeah.
But at no point can you say, and therefore God didn't have anything. Because the creatures did it, the God didn't.
Right.
It's like, no, God did it. That's why the creatures did it. And so the other way that it might point that our the use of our wills might point to the Lord is in terms of Christians, when Paul says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So he tells you to do something. You use your will. Work out your salvation. You do it. Gives a reason. It is God who is at work within you to will and to work according to His good pleasure. So you work because God's at work. And so your will is the result. He's working in you what is pleasing in His sight. So he's working, and that's why you're working. And so in that sense, a renewed, sanctified will is a testimony to the grace of God in the life of a fallen human.
Right. Because God wrote the story, we are free to live in it.
Right.
And live how we
Yeah.
How we please.
Yeah, how we
more or
please,
less.
right. Yes,
Yeah.
and the problem is that our pleasures are broken.
Yeah.
By nature, we're sinners.
Right. Sometimes we have to tell our pleases no.
This is great. I'll get it.
This is fantastic. I love this little quick reminder. There we go. Last couple questions.
Sure.
What's your biggest piece of advice you would give to anyone watching?
Piece of advice. I would say you should regularly be asking yourself. So take responsibility for you and what's yours. Meaning, whatever station of life you're in, a question that should be regularly on your table is what am I responsible for, and what does God want me to do? He's placed me somewhere. So I'm a husband and a father. I'm a professor. I'm a pastor, and so that's a filter for me constantly to go. That's what I've been entrusted with.
Right.
What am I supposed to do? What does faithfulness mean for that? But someone else might be a student at a college. Someone else might be a grandparent. Someone else, you could have all. God's entrusted us with different things. You should constantly meaning like on the daily, coming back to what has God entrusted to me, and what does He want me to do with it. That should be a filter to keep you from spending yourself in fruitless endeavors, worrying yourself away about things you can't control. It's no, Lord's provided your things you're supposed to do, and so trust Him and do it.
Right. Where can people find you and all of this and emotional leadership and emotional sabotage?
Yeah, so if you want emotional sabotage, it's emotionalsabotage.com. You can get the book for Christmas. Give it to all your friends.
Yeah.
So on Twitter, Joe_Rigney is my handle there. And then in terms of if you want to go find more writings, I write regularly for World Opinions and American Reformer. For years, I wrote at Desiring God. There's lots of articles there that I wrote. And then on Canon Plus.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's
Thanks,
been great. See you guys.